Okay, so there's only a handful of us on the line, but we're going to get started. So this is Ted. I'm joined by Gregory L. Smith. Gregory is really the project lead for the National Readiness Initiative and has put together this presentation that's been approved by Harvey to be delivered at institutes. I think everybody on the phone here knows that this is one of 3 courses that's part of what we call the Disaster Cycle Services Program Update. The idea is that you would host a 3-hour session and folks would circulate through, 1 hour of national readiness, 1 hour of RCView, and 1 hour BPM, DPS support update. Or you could string these 3 sessions out separately and do them over lunch or breakfast or something like that. So this fits in with that triad of 3 courses. By the way, I see that Steve Sarinelli has now joined us. Steve, are you on the phone as well? All right, not sure if Steve has joined us on the phone. I am going to leave the phone lines open, so, Gregory will pause at different points and see if you have questions, and unless we start getting noise in the background, we'll leave those lines open, but I can mute them globally if I need to. Not sure what else I need to add here, Gregory, other than to say that this is it's designed to be a 50-minute session, probably about 40 or 45 minutes of presentation, and about 10 minutes of Q&A rolled in here. And the point really is to inform everybody about the National Readiness Initiative and what role they might need to play in it, how it might impact them, and so on, and how it's going to inform our goals in the field over the next several years. And particularly what the pilot's going to look like. So Gregory's going to take us through all of that. This is your opportunity as institute presenters to really pick the brains of the expert here. Think about the kinds of questions you're going to get from the audience and some of the concerns you may have so that Gregory can address them today. We can add to any FAQs that we're going to produce afterward, and of course update the PowerPoint as well as the narration that goes with it. So before I hand things over to Gregory here, I just see Mr. Sarinelli dropped off. I was going to see if he was on the phone. Is there anybody who's on the telephone only who is not in the WebEx with us?
Hi, this is Chuck Ratcliffe in IT Readiness. I'm on, and I plan on joining the WebEx shortly.
You're joining the WebEx shortly, Chuck? Okay, so once I see your name pop up in there, I will send you the PDF of the slide notes so you can follow along with what's going on in the classroom. If you want to print it out, take notes, and so on. So I'll look for your name to pop up. With that, I'm going to be monitoring the chat window. If you do get some urgent questions that come up, I would urge you to type them into the chat window in a very concise manner. That'll kind of cue them up for Gregory. If you just want to wait and ask him live at those appropriate points where he stops, that's fine too. So either way, we've got a small group here. It needn't be so formal. And with that, Gregory, let me hand things over to you. You should also be able to control the forward and reversing of the slides, right? So you're all set.
Yes, yeah, I did. I tested that out. Thanks, Ted, and welcome everyone. And looking at the names on the list here on the WebEx, everybody knows who I am. I know who you guys are. I don't think we have to go through introductions or anything. And also, the IT is joining us based on a conversation that I had earlier this morning with IT. So we want to make sure that they're clued in on at least the overview of the Readiness Initiative. And that's a good point. It's a good starting point for us to begin. So as Ted said, a little housekeeping before we get started. As Ted said, when you see the notes page, first and foremost, the notes, this is not meant to be a scripted presentation on your part as a presenter. Our goal is to provide you with some bullet points on the presenter's notes section so that just to help you along with the presentation and perhaps to answer any questions that come up during the presentation. But again, it is not meant to be scripted. The other kind of important thing to understand the overview, and as we go through this, I'll point this out. One of the things that we want to create is to create the distinction between what is the Readiness Initiative, what is the Mass Care Readiness Pilot, which is a component of the Readiness Initiative, and then what will ultimately be the National Readiness Program of Record when in 2020, when this pilot phase and the initiative, the National Readiness Initiative phase of this, if you will, has concluded. One of the things that we've gotten back as far as feedback from the slides is that confusion, is that and I really want to make sure that people don't think that when we get to the slides where we're describing the Mass Care Readiness Pilot, that pilot is the quote-unquote Readiness Initiative. It is a component of the Readiness Initiative, and we'll talk about that some more as we go through. So again, this deck is meant to do, again, is to give an overview of where we are now in where the disaster cycle services is now in their activities and their planning and their thinking towards our renewed focus on readiness. So let's go to, it's going to be challenging because I have to change 2 slides here. So one of the, clearly one of our overarching goals is to begin to reestablish, I leave it with establish, but in some cases when you're presenting, so for example, if I were in the audience, if you were presenting this to me, I would have the experience and understanding that we in the past we have had a focus on readiness, and we have had tools and initiatives and processes that supported readiness, and we had a common language around readiness. So it's a discussion point where we're reestablishing, at least in my opinion, and Gregory's opinion, my offer is we're reestablishing our common language and our shared understanding of readiness. So you'll note on the presenter's notes page that there are some bullet points to help understand what we mean by a shared understanding. You know, that readiness is a continuing component of the readiness program, that readiness is not something separate and above from what you do day to day. It's an integral part of the regional program, of the division program, of the national program, for that matter. So moving on to the next slide, let's change here. So if you've been around for a while like me, the prior to this iteration of our readiness efforts, we had a three-leg stool, if you will, for readiness. So it was trained people, the supplies, the things that we needed, and the partnerships and relationships in the community. Well, we've updated that, those elements have been updated to include accessible infrastructure programs and systems. So now we're establishing a concept around a 4-leg stool, and it's very appropriate when you think about it, that now our responses and our mission, our service delivery, includes and involves a lot more technology, a lot more programs, a lot more systems. So that's why in order for us to reliably accomplish our mission, we have to include that infrastructure, programs, and systems in our considerations as we move forward in readiness. So how can we reliably accomplish our mission? And then it's kind of framed around that 4-leg stool is encompassed, if you will, in a frame of what we do. So we deploy, whether it's for a local event, single-family fire, we deploy, we assess that deployment, we make adjustments based on that assessment, and then it comes back full, I guess triangle in this case, it comes back full triangle, and then we deploy again and assess again and adjust in that continuing process. So changing to the next slide.
Hey,
yes.
Gregory?
Yes.
Yeah, this is Ted. I don't know if anybody else is here. You're kind of breaking up a little bit. It might just be my phone line, but...
Yeah, I should have, I apologize. Can everyone hear me? Is that the case? Am I breaking up for people?
No, I hear you fine, Gregory.
Okay.
Okay. All right. It may just be me then. So, all right, go right ahead. Sorry for the interruption.
It does sound just a little muted. I have my phone up as high as I can, and a couple of the words I can't quite hear.
Okay. I'll It's amazing, different instruments. I'll get this thing as close to.
Thank
Okay,
you.
how about that? Is that any better?
A little bit better, yeah, thanks.
Okay. So then, as we talk about the 4 elements of readiness, then we go to the next slide. The next slide gives you the opportunity to define those in more detail, to define those elements of readiness. So again, if you think about the evolution of this presentation of this deck, Emily, your camera's on. If you think about the evolution of this deck, when Harvey and Brad were doing these presentations, and in some cases, some of you have likely, especially in this audience, some of you have likely seen this presentation before. So this is the same presentation that Harvey and I believe Brad, both of them were using. Oh, now we're facing the ceiling there, aren't we? That Harvey and Brad were using at the division meetings, at the region meetings. But what we've done is our goal has been to kind of condense it a little bit and then kind of tailor the language towards the audience, considering that this is going to be presented at institutes, and institutes, the participants at institutes include our frontline volunteers. So how can we make this as succinct as possible, but again, in a language that our frontline volunteers, as well as our leadership volunteers, our employees in the regions and in the division can understand, that doesn't confuse them. So this is an opportunity, again, to more succinctly define what we mean by trained people, infrastructure, accessible infrastructure, programs and systems, necessary supplies, and a supportive community. So moving on to the next slide.
Hey, Gregory?
Yes.
I'm sorry. Is it okay if I ask a question?
Absolutely.
It's Ann. So I was just trying to look at this new, so just so you know, our division hasn't been given a briefing yet, so this is new to us.
Okay.
So the 4 elements, I'm just trying to map those over to our pillar processes. You know, we had obviously the 5 pillar processes, and in the slide it says that our previous readiness efforts included 3 elements. I'm a little bit confused about how this aligns with the pillar processes and where the initial 3 came from, just in terms of how we can handle that when we get questions.
Okay, and that's a great question. And as a matter of fact, this is the second time it's come up. And after this presentation today, I'm going to include a slide that of the pillar processes to highlight what I'm about to say. If you go back before re-engineering, before the pillar processes, we had 4 processes: preparedness, readiness, response, and recovery. When the pillar processes, and don't get me wrong, we're not going to explain it this way. I'm just framing this for you guys, for the audience that I'm speaking to now. When we decided on the 3 pillar processes, we pulled readiness out of the pillar processes, and either consciously or unconsciously included readiness in preparedness, in prepared. So now to redefine, in my opinion, Gregory's opinion, to redefine readiness, we've got to reinsert it into what we consider to be our pillar processes, because readiness shows up nowhere in the original development of what we now refer to as our pillar processes. So one of the definitions, if you will, of readiness is that readiness is the bridge between being prepared and responding. So if you're prepared, the example that I always use is, if you take CPR class, if you have a plan, if you have your emergency kit, then you're prepared to survive. You're prepared to endure the event and come out of the event at the other end. But the next question then is, are you, as an individual, as a family, as a community, as organizations and agencies, are we ready to respond? And that readiness includes these 4 things.
Yeah, I hear you. My recommendation would be, we've trained people the last several years on the 5 pillar and the 3 core processes. So I think it would be helpful, and it sounds like you are, but
Yes.
rather than to talk about this 3 previous elements, that we refer to the 3 core and the 5 pillar. And I think when those were rolled out, we had different definitions of prepare. I know in our division we talked about the capital P, so community preparedness and readiness. So anyway, however it works out.
Right, yeah, and I'll add the slide, but the main reason that, one of the reasons that, and I'll, depending upon your audience, that's the other thing that's going to be important with the presenters. The presenters of this are going to have to know their audience. So for example, I understand the audience that I'm presenting to now, but I'm not standing in a room full of Institute participants. So, for example, and that's the example that I used, if I were in the room and there was no reference to any readiness efforts before the pillar processes, I would be confused as a participant, because I would be saying, well, wait a minute, we used to do this, and wait a minute, we used to call this, and we used to do that. And there's a lot of people out there that have been a part of the organization prior to the implementation of the pillar. But don't get me wrong. So put a period there. Next paragraph. I'm going to put a slide in that does exactly what you just described, which is highlight where this fits into what we now see as the pillar processes, the core and pillar processes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, not a problem. Not a problem. So here we are. We were talking about the opportunity to define what we mean by these elements: train people, accessible infrastructure, necessary supplies, supportive community. Then we were going to move on to the objectives of the readiness program. So again, this is where we're going. We're still talking about the overall readiness program. So what is it that ultimately we need to see? What is it that we need to achieve in our readiness program? What are the common languages that we have to use in the readiness program? So if you look at this slide, this is the technical, and you guys understand this, the technical depiction, if you will, of the categories of disasters. So the high probability, high consequence, if we look at the upper left, that's where we spend most of, that's where on deployable responses, that's where we spend most of our time. So that's those level 3s through level 7s. There's a high probability that they're going to happen, and there's a high consequence, meaning it involves larger segments of the community, more individuals and families, and larger segments of the community. When we go to the upper right, one of the questions or the comments that has come back from the presentation, especially when you're talking about disaster action team operations, everybody doesn't necessarily understand, use this lexicon. So the notion that a single family fire, if you will, it's a high probability, but the notion that it is a low consequence may require some explanation on the part of the presenter, because the notion being it's a high consequence if it's a single family fire. It's a high consequence for the family that's involved in the fire, but it's not a high consequence for the community at large. So that's the lower consequence and the higher consequence. So also what we're not focusing on, we're not focusing on specifically developing readiness for catastrophic events. So for those events, one of the things, and let me see, did I include it in, let me get to that slide, hold on. Yeah, I included that in this slide. One of the things that I forgot, that I didn't get a chance, I didn't forget, I didn't get a chance to include in this slide is one of the feedback that we got from a meeting yesterday where this presentation was used is, I'm going to include in the notes FEMA's definition for a catastrophic disaster or a catastrophic event, because apparently there was a lot of discussion about the different definitions of a catastrophic event. So we're going to include the definition of a catastrophic event, but the notion being that our ability to respond to anything above a level 7 which is inextricably tied to our ability to respond to level 3s through 7s. So it's a roll-up of our capacity to respond. And then at some point in time, if it's a true catastrophic event, it's going to exceed our resource capability to respond. And in some cases, depending upon which of the 6 federal risk areas you're talking about, it will challenge us as a species to respond and to, as a society, to respond and recover from. So the goal being in this slide, this is the sweet spot that we're focusing our readiness efforts around, those high probability, high consequence disasters.
Gregory, it's Ann. A
Yes.
suggestion.
Yes.
A suggestion for the notes page for the presenters.
Mm-hmm.
I would add in the dollar ranges for the levels, because not everyone might have those memorized, and someone might ask a question about it.
Okay, but and we sort of had a discussion about that, because one of the things at Disaster Cycle Services, one of the things that logistics is in the process of doing is translating the dollar amounts of our responses to the resource, to what that equals in resources. So if you're asking for this to be included, just so people can anecdotally, if they don't know, the cost of a level 5 and a level 7.
That's what I'm asking for. Yep.
Okay.
Because right now that's the only definition we have organizationally, understanding that you're going a different way. But right now, if you ask someone what a level 5 is, they're going to say $2.5 million to $5 million or whatever. So I just think having that in the notes would give people just be a good backup.
But again, and understand, this presentation is being presented on behalf of the senior management of the organization. I'll take this back to them and say, do you want to include the dollar amounts?
In the notes page. In the notes page.
In the notes page. Okay, got it.
That's what I'm asking for in the notes page, yeah.
Okay. Now, and when you hear silence on my part after we have a conversation, I'm making a note. So I haven't lost my plate. I'm making a note. Dollar. Okay. So again, there's a few notes here, and again, we kind of highlight that part about if people are confused by the reference of low consequence for for disaster action team operation response. So, okay. Anyway, moving on. So then the next slide illustrates what is currently the proposed for the national level readiness requirements. Now, for the folks who haven't seen this presentation, you see the ORs. When this presentation was first made, it said 10 non-catastrophic concurrent major events. 4, there were no ORs. So this is meant to be, it's not meant to that the readiness level or the readiness requirements are if all of these things happened at once. This is if the readiness level requirements are if it's 2 catastrophics or 2 large level 5s or 5 concurrent 2s or 1s. That's the whole point of this slide. So, and as a matter of fact, I put it here. I put it on the wrong slide. So I'll move well, we can stay here. This is on this slide note. This is where the FEMA's definition for a catastrophic event. So if we can settle around that and not go down a rabbit hole in the presentation around the definition of a catastrophic event. So then next, ask the question, are we as ready as we must be? The answer could be no, but it's also subjective because in some cases it depends on the risk and the location, the event, the risk and the location. But the main point about this is that we could say that readiness is a continual process and that we have opportunities to improve our readiness. Yes, of course we do. So moving to the next slide. The next slide is an illustration of our current volunteer workforce breakdown in Volunteer Connections. So the first note for the presenters is this does not include employees. This is a volunteer breakdown in Volunteer Connections. So if you look at the first illustration there of the 83,333 individuals that we have in Volunteer Connection, 34,000 and change are indicated that they're disaster responders, meaning that they will deploy. They have checked the box that says that they are disaster responders and they will deploy. That 49,000 and change did not check that box, which means they're local disaster workers. Of that 34,000 and change, 4,000, just under 5,000, have no group activity or position. And 29,000 plus and some change do. So of those 29,000 and change, only 3,000 will respond, 3,100 will respond locally, 33,000 will respond in the state, 10,000 will respond in the region, and 12,000 will respond nationally. So the purpose of this slide is to indicate what our current workforce, our current volunteer workforce looks like. Coming up in the next slide, we'll be able to see that there has been a decline. There's been an increase in the number of responses that we've had, but there's been a decline in the number of responders that we have. So again, this slide is meant to this first slide is to give an illustration of what the volunteer workforce breakdown actually looks like. So if we go to the next slide.
Gregory, it's Emily.
Yes.
I have a question. What does that state piece of the pie represent?
That those individuals, 3,094 will only respond within their state. They won't respond outside of their state. So it's either they'll respond locally within their region, within the state, or they'll go anywhere. They'll go nationally.
Got it. Thank you.
No problem. So then we go to the readiness. So again, readiness challenges. So if you look at the left, since the operational activity for this fiscal cycle, the numbers of operations that we've had since July 1st, the number of total assignments, the total number of individuals that we've had, the total number of assignments. So there is indeed an increased operational tempo. But then again, if you look at, and again, these illustrations, these visuals are not meant to be finite as far as in their detail. What they're meant to do is illustrate a trend, that there is a decrease in the availability of trained responders. So again, the validation for why we're moving forward with the refocus on readiness. So then the playbook to launch and sustain the Readiness Initiative. So again, now we're starting to move from the concept of what is readiness, what is our shared language, to what are some of the actual things that we're planning to do moving forward related to our readiness. So if we think in terms of the lanes if we look at those parallel lanes, look at the definition of readiness, or the four areas of readiness, and we look at those as parallel lanes of action. This slide is meant to illustrate that where the initial focus, and when we get to the readiness pilot, we'll talk about this, the initial focus of the initiative is to address the the supportive community. So the supportive community, and we talk about the pilot regions, because supportive community includes engaging with our emergency management and other partners on planning assumptions and readiness assessments. It also addresses engagement within the community, either around planning or around service delivery. So if you're looking at all four of the lanes and what is going to be the initial focus again is on that supportive community aspect of those parallel lanes of action. So now we go to the Readiness Initiative outcomes. So again, to align our readiness capacities and capabilities with our government partners, to commit realistically and transparently to service delivery requirements based on those levels of readiness. So we identify what our readiness is. We then identify what the service delivery, what the potential for what the risk is, what the potential for service delivery will be. We agree upon those, and then we make realistic, transparent commitments to service delivery based on the identified levels of readiness, so that we can deliver quality services to the community against those commitments. So in other words, you can embed in that, if you will, that we're managing expectations. So we're putting a refocus on managing the expectations before the event occurs, managing and coming to an agreement within the community of the expectations, the requirements for service delivery, and the existing readiness to deliver against those service delivery needs. So this is the reverse Aristotle quote. This came up in a meeting yesterday. The Aristotle quote is the sum is greater than the sum. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. But in this instance, the quote is the sum of the parts is greater than the whole. And it's my offer that the reason that they reworded that is because it's to put a focus on the parts. The parts being the regions, the readiness of the regions, as opposed to putting the focus on the readiness of the whole, which is the entire system. So that we focus on those parts, and then that supports the quality and the reliability of the whole. So it's a national, because national readiness is a merge of the regional and division readiness. And in order for us to do this, we have to have the management tools and processes in place. If we're talking about the parts, then when it exceeds the ability of the resources of the parts, what processes and tools do we have in place to allocate and decide on resources above and beyond what the regions can have at their disposal to provide and address those resources, those service delivery requirements. So that's one of the absolutely imperative outcomes, because one of the things that comes up in conversation about this is how can we commit to service delivery requirements, or how can we make a commitment when resources aren't static, which is true. So it depends. If I'm in County A and I make a commitment to the county for X requirements, then that is dependent upon, in some cases, nothing else happening anywhere. So if something is happening, if there are other events that are drawing on resources, then what management tools and processes do we have in place to ensure that those commitments can actually be met through resources outside of where the commitments were actually made? So we also want to increase our internal and external confidence in our ability in our sufficiency, in our capacity and capability to reliably respond to a full range of desires. And we want to use the measurable and we want to establish measurable and a positive return on targeted investments because we have to invest. In the outcome of this is clearly going to be that we have to invest in readiness. So how can we realize a positive return or document a positive return on that targeted investment? So the next slide is meant to illustrate sort of that we're kind of all in this together and begin to identify that this is a mutually accountable system, that the four legs of the stool are present at the regional level and at the national headquarters level, just with different areas of focus, that there are accountabilities for the region that where the event occurs. There are accountabilities for regions that will be multiplying the workforce or deploying individuals into the region where it occurred, where the event occurred. So again, this is just to give an illustration of the mutual accountability and understanding. So understanding our mutual accountabilities ensures that we continue to focus on how we have to be supportive and interconnected in our readiness efforts. So then moving on to the next slide. So in the next slide is kind of an illustration of if we take those, again, those four areas of readiness, those four identified areas of readiness, and give an illustration of the anticipated regional readiness workload. So the trained workforce, the region is going to need to recruit and train and recognize and manage and deploy and volunteers and a workforce. For infrastructure and programs, so that's facilities, other equipment, and service delivery support relationships. So where are we going to get that food from? Where are we going to get those extra vehicles from? And then keep continuing around so that for our resources, we're maintaining our inventories, our emergency response vehicles, and our expertise along the ability to support service delivery. So then going again back around to the supportive community, that we have a dedicated, consistent, sustained mass care planning in each county, in each state, and at the county level with our partners. So that's at least as we begin to implement the initiative, as we begin to, and we'll get into the pilot in a moment, as we implement the pilot, and as we ultimately drive towards the National Readiness Program of Record, that these are the anticipated workloads, these are the things that the regions will need to focus on. So moving on to the next slide. So kind of in a sequence, the readiness activities, at least when we initially initiate the initiative, if you will. So it's aligning our planning assumptions with our government emergency management partners and community partners. So in other words, this is what we believe, again, this is what we believe is going to happen. This is what we believe the service delivery requirements are going to be as a result of this thing that we believe is going to happen. So then we take the readiness tool and determine that based on those things that we said we think were going to happen and the services that we're going to have to deliver, these are the services that we can currently deliver. This is what we can commit to based on our current level of readiness. So once that conversation and that commitment is documented, once that conversation is had and that those commitments are agreed to, then the goal is to memorialize those commitments in writing. So and again, a tool is being created to memorialize those commitments in writing. And then, as with anything, if any plans or commitments that you make, the goal would be, hopefully, to exercise those commitments in an exercise before you have to actually execute those commitments in a real-world event. So again, it's to develop the agreement and alignment on the specifics of what ARC will provide in supported shelters, feeding, and related support services required by the planning assumptions, or that have been identified by the planning assumptions, if you will. So then the next slide is an illustration of a scorecard, but again, this is an example of, as we move through the initiative, And we realize, we get the lessons learned from our work in the initiative as we move towards the National Readiness Program of Record, that we will be developing, there'll be a scorecard for, and we're going into the pilots in a minute, the scorecard for how the pilots will be performing, and ultimately there'll be a scorecard, there'll be a readiness scorecard that the divisions and that the regions will use to dashboard and track their readiness efforts. But that's not, the scorecard is not being introduced, the scorecard is not a part of, and when we get to the timeline, I'll illustrate that when we talk about the timeline for what's going to occur and when. So then we go to the next slide. So the next slide is, so at DCS, this slide did say national headquarters. In my office, national headquarters is a building. So this is actually the Disaster Cycle Services Readiness Initiative support. So this is what we're doing at Disaster Cycle Services at national headquarters. So currently, we're completing the planning. So we're completing the readiness support tools, so the tools that we're going to use in the initial implementation of the initiative. We're ensuring, our goal is to ensure that we understand what we currently know and then what we need to know about readiness, again, as we move through the implementation of the initiative. That we establish and ensure that we have a shared understanding of what we can expect of each other at the national, regional, and division, region, and level. That we're working with volunteer services to develop a shared approach to building volunteer capacity. The other thing that we're doing, and when we get to this, I'll tier this for you. We're working on the 17 region, high risk region pilot, and we're going to talk extensively about that in a few more slides. So additionally, humanitarian services is aggressively pursuing some other enterprise-wide initiatives. Some of those involve warehousing, inventory, fleet, and other systems that we use. And our goal is to market and build on the success of the pilot and the initial activities that we engage in the initiative. So that can support and shape our internal confidence about our capacity and capability to respond to a full range of disasters. So moving on to the next slide. So this is where we begin to talk about the mass care readiness pilot. So when I said that we would talk about the tiers, and I'll include this in the notes, when we talk about the tiers of this, there's the overall readiness initiative that we're embarking on. A component of that readiness initiative, one component of that readiness initiative, is the mass care readiness pilot. So there are other initiatives that are a part of the readiness initiative, but what we're giving you an overview now of is the pilot, the 3 fiscal year mass care readiness pilot. So going to the next slide. So the mass care readiness pilot will first focus on the highest risk in disaster-prone regions. So these 17 regions were selected based on the number of level 3 disasters they experienced between 2011 and 2016. So it's not to say that there aren't other disaster-prone regions, but this, based on that criteria, was the selection. These are the regions that were selected based on that level 3 plus disaster activity for those years. So moving forward. So an overarching desired outcome is that the regions are established on a trajectory to strengthen operational readiness through a process that aligns mass care expectations and commitments with local emergency management officials in the pilot regions. and to utilize this pilot to validate that process. So this is an important point to me because some of the feedback that we've gotten from this presentation is there's the beginnings of a confusion related to the pilot, and some people know about it, some people don't, related to the pilot. The pilot in and of itself is not the initiative. The pilot is meant to help support validating some of the assessments, conclusions, processes that we're going to engage in to develop what will ultimately be the National Readiness Program of Record. So historically, we have a tendency to launch everything at one time. So individuals that have that experience with the organization will see this pilot and think, oh my goodness, well this is how we're going to do readiness. No, this is how we're going to pilot our readiness notions, our readiness plans, our readiness tools. This is how we're going to pilot them in a confined area of the enterprise, but still take advantage of the fact that we need to accomplish readiness in these areas while we're experiencing the pilot. But the pilot is meant to inform. It's meant to educate and to inform us on what the ultimate product, if you will be. It is in itself not the product. So some more specific outcomes on the next slide. So again, we're talking about a primary focus in the high probability, high impact areas, enable us to align our operational readiness requirements with those of local government. So again, to align those based on a shared understanding of what those requirements are, not before the fact, if you will, not a conversation after the event occurs to try to align what our readiness, what the requirements are and what our ability to meet those requirements are. To be able to say, based on the current levels of readiness, this is what the region can support and provide. So, moving on, and we'll get to some more tools that will help support that in a moment. Additional specific outcomes. So then we'll commit to the service delivery capacities based on those identified levels of readiness. So we could couch that by saying we're telling honest stories about what our capabilities are. So to deliver quality services to the public against those commitments in the pilot regions, and again, to validate or not our approach to this within the pilot regions, and then ultimately to expand the pilot beyond FY19 and adjust the readiness programs based on the lessons learned that we're going to learn in FY18. So moving on to the next slide. So right now, we are in the process of completing the tools that will be used for the readiness pilot deliverables. So if we go to the left side of the page, there is a tool that's being created that will support the regions in working with our emergency management and other partners to determine planning assumptions and to align those planning assumptions with government. There's a job tool that's being created for that. There is a job tool that's being created for the region to determine their readiness to respond to meet the requirements, as well as what requirements they can meet. So it's kind of it's a byproduct. They're both byproducts of the same data. So if I'm saying this is what I need to respond to, and my readiness assessment tells me this is what I have, then that automatically tells me the level to which that I can respond to the requirements and the level to which I can respond. So I mean, if I have 10 shelters in the NSS, but I only have 5 shelter managers, so intellectually, if you will, on paper, I can only open 5 shelters because I have the facilities, but I don't have the workforce to support the opening the facilities. So then to accompany the tools, there is a mass care planning course that is being it's a twofold experience for the pilot regions. it's a mass care planning course, but it's also a training experience on how to use the two tools that are being developed. So the mass care planning assumption and alignment tool and the regional mass care assessment tool. So there'll be a training for that. There'll also be a training in relationship management, because the other thing the other feedback that comes back from this, clearly we have to provide the individuals that are participating in the pilot, and then ultimately down the line, we have to be able to provide people with the training they need to manage the interaction between our emergency management and other partners. So to manage this conversation about requirements, expectations, capacity and capability, and readiness levels. So we have to be able to provide some training for how to manage that interaction. So again, there'll be a balanced scorecard. Again, there'll be a balanced scorecard so we can track the progress of the pilot, but ultimately there will be a balanced scorecard for the National Readiness Program of Record. That will create a database and ability to roll up the regional requirements up to the division level, up to the national level, and that, again, we kind of touched on it. If there has to be a national resource adjudication process. So, in other words, again, we've made the commitment in County A or in Region A that we have this level of requirements. Here are the gaps in what we can provide and what is needed. But here is how we can adjudicate those gaps using resources from outside that region. So be that at the division level or be that at the national level. So how do we adjudicate and make sure that the resources that can be brought to bear that are available to be brought to bear can be brought to bear depending on the situation and the circumstances. So moving on to the next slide. And this was just reintroduced into the deck. Addressing the notion that if you're not a pilot region, well, what should you be doing? Well, you should be doing what you do every day, related to readiness or related to capacity and capability development within your region. So you should continue doing those ongoing and purposeful efforts to build capacity. You should continue to collect existing plans. You should know what those existing plans are. You should be working on reviewing and building relationships with every county emergency manager, and you should be incorporating your disaster leadership in those conversations and in those engagements. You should be cataloging any existing mass care commitments that exist, that you have. You should continue to document ongoing mass caring planning efforts with partners, be those government emergency management partners or community partners. You should certainly review and update all your NSS entries. And regions should anticipate, as we move through the pilot, that additional regions will be engaged in the pilot, but regions will also be engaged in those other enterprise-wide humanitarian services, enterprise-wide initiatives that are going on, those warehouse inventory and things like the youre strategy initiative.
Hey, Gregory?
So, yes.
I'm sorry, but I just had a comment on the last slide. It's a little in the weeds, but I think having regional before NSS might confuse some of the target audience.
Good
point. Yeah, okay.
Good point. Thank you. Good catch. Sure. As a matter of fact, on my other machine here, I'll do that right now. That's simple. Take that and go delete. Delete. Done. Thank you for that. Okay, so then let's move on to the next one, the next slide. This slide, the reason why this slide, future pilot regions during FY18, and the next slide will be the timeline slide, and this will be clear. The reason that this is kind of shaded out is because this, again, is a work in progress, because it's dependent upon what we're learning and experiencing from the 17 pilot regions. So we really can't make an assessment or make a declaration about the future pilot regions until we know more about the validation or not of the efforts, tools, of activities that we're currently engaged in. So again, I said that we'll move to the next slide. The timeline pilot will kind of illustrate this. Now, because in the WebEx, this is, I guess, a PDF. When it's done as a PowerPoint, the timeline is animated. So we start in FY17, and that's what we talk about, completing those tools, developing the plans and the job tools. So, and we selected the 17 regions, and we will shortly begin to train the pilot region teams on how to engage in this pilot. So that's what we're going to do between now and the end of the fiscal year. Then in the beginning of fiscal year 18, we'll officially launch the mass care readiness pilot in those 17 regions. During that fiscal year, we'll evaluate the pilot and the job tools. And then as a part of that, although it's darkened out in that previous slide, we'll start looking at beginning to select and include additional regions to bring into the pilot during FY18. So then during FY19, we'll modify, based on what we learned in FY18, we'll modify and expand the pilot. We'll adjust the supply and volunteer training and engagement systems to build capacity, because, again, those are some of the things that we're looking to validate in FY18. And then moving on towards FY19, when, based on everything that we developed in 17, experienced and learned in 19, adjusted and modified, in 18, adjusted and modified in 19, then we will establish and execute the National Readiness Program of Record. So that's guys, is essentially the deck. Questions?
Gregory, Dan again. Sorry, there's just a couple typos in the notes pages on the number of regions.
Yep.
A couple of the notes pages, it says there's 18 pilot regions, so just FYI.
Yeah, I see it.
It's on page 27, and then also, it's also back when you talk about you list the pilot regions. I think it was on there. No, there's one other time. Desired outcome slide.
Okay.
It says the 17 region pilot program will be successful when all 18 regions.
Well, of course it will. Come on. Get with the program. Of course it will. No, one of the things that happened with this, at one point there were 18 regions.
I figured, yeah.
And then they changed, and some things didn't change in the 18 regions. The other thing that we're doing is this, the presentation itself was delivered by Harvey and Brad, and they deliver it from the slides. So we've had to craft the bullet point notes for the presenters in this particular presentation.
I had a question on slide 18, the readiness scorecard. And I couldn't see it very well.
Well, you're not supposed to be able to see it very well, because it's not an actual image of the readiness scorecard. Let me see if I can get back to it. Keep going back.
Because I'm not sure that everyone who's delivering this or receiving this knows what a balanced scorecard approach is. Well,
and if I'm being candid, even though this is being recorded, I still have to be candid. I didn't want to include this slide for the very reason that you just described. And we had a great deal of discussion about this because I think this slide is very easily understood at the executive level at the division disaster director level, I think it is understood at that level when you're presenting it. But I agree with you. I don't believe that everybody understands what this actually means. And before we do the final deck, I'm going to make one more attempt at making the request that we consider not having this slide. Because again, the reason you can't see it is because that's the words that are on that image, the blue and white image with the red, yellow, and green dots, have nothing to do with readiness. It's an image of a scorecard.
I think it might be confusing to people. So it sounds like you're on track for that. And then also, here we call it a readiness scorecard. And then is that the same thing as one of the last slides? Let's see. On slide 23, you say balanced mass care regional readiness scorecard. So I'm guessing that's a subset of the other scorecard. I mean, there's going to be a scorecard that's going to have components including mass care and other regional readiness, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So I just, in terms of terminology, it's a little confusing. Just for someone new looking at it, I would suggest.
I agree with you completely. I truly do. And I will bring that up. As a matter of fact, we're presenting to doing a project update with Brad tomorrow, and the notes that I'm taking now, the thing about especially about removing the scorecard, I'll bring that up with him tomorrow.
Yeah, or maybe just even using the same title. And then what does exportable FEMA training mean?
That there is an existing a mass care planning course. FEMA has an existing mass care planning course. It's either 2 or 5 days, 3 or 5 days. I forget what it is. So what we're actually doing is taking. So it's the conversation between, in the pilot, are we trying to develop mass care planners, or are we trying to give individuals the tools they need to identify planning assumptions and requirements from those planning assumptions? And they're two very different things. So
yeah, and I think I've taken that course, and I'm not sure how it aligns with our job tools and assessment tools.
And again, we are in such agreement. We are in such agreement here. I just had this conversation a couple of days ago where my declaration was we need to have a Red Cross training product, that teaches our Red Cross workforce how to operate within our Red Cross systems. So that's one statement. The next statement is, do we need to have within our system, do we have, as a capability, do we need mass care planners? Yes, we do. We absolutely do. But we also need our workforce to understand how to utilize and manage their way through our processes related to mass care planning and this particular element of mass care planning, which is identifying those planning assumptions and coming to agreement on the requirements based on those planning assumptions.
So that being said, you might want to consider different verbiage on slide 23, or at least in the notes section. There's no notes on there.
Right.
Yeah, because I mean, I don't think, I heard what you said, but even if I was teaching this, I don't know my comfort level in saying that mass care FEMA course, in the way I'm reading this slide, by exportable training, the way I'm interpreting that is that would support those things on the left, and I don't think it does.
Agreed. But I'll make one distinction from you. You're not teaching anything with this presentation.
But, well, whatever, leading people through, facilitating, discussing, whatever. Okay. Yeah. But they're going to look to the person who's facilitating to answer the questions, right?
Oh, understood. Understood. I'm just making the distinction between teaching and presenting.
I hear you.
Okay. Okay, so that's the exporting. I'm making that note. Yeah, I'll make that correction. I've wanted to make that correction for a long time anyway. Okay, any other questions, observations, or concerns? So again, with the understanding that you will, and if we take this down in stages, it's my ability moving forward to present this material from the slides increases every time I have a conversation about it. The notes that we'll provide for you ultimately when you get the final deck that you'll use, the notes that we will provide to you, again, will give you a framework for how you can answer those questions. As a matter of fact, for the slides where we have gotten specific questions, I'll put those in the notes. These are some of the questions that we've received when we presented this slide. I'll put those into the notes, which is one of the reasons why the slide notes haven't been completed yet, because we're on a as with most things, not that today should be any different than any other. With most things, we're on a fairly swift timeline with this. To get this moving forward. So again, we're trying to get as much of the information as concise as we can before we actually give you the final product that you're going to use. But the slides themselves, the order of the slides, will not be much different than they are right now. The only thing that we'll do our best to do is provide you with as much background that we can give you in the notes section.
Hey, Gregory. I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut somebody off there, but Gregory, this is Pat. What is the timeline we're looking at? Because I'll be quite frank with you. I mean, I have regions right now that are done with their DTI for the year, and we obviously didn't give this presentation out to that region. I got another one coming up very, very short, very soon, and the remainder coming up during the spring because we want to get them done prior to hurricane season really kicking off. So, what is the timeline we're looking at?
Well, it's my understanding that the institutes, that the first institutes, at least that I've been, because I'm not privy to all conversations about institutes or about training or about the regions. The task that I was given was for the institutes that will be beginning on March 3rd. So that whatever is being scheduled post March 3rd is the timeline that essentially we were given to produce this deck,
okay,
and to help you guys understand how to present this deck. That's the timeline we were given.
Okay.
Thanks, Pat. Great question.
Gregory, it's Ann. My last question. So I'm going to be presenting this as a triad, the 3 courses in a row, or workshops, or whatever you want to call them. And so the other 2 are a lot of talking at non-interactive sessions. So it's going to be 3 hours of me standing in front of a group of people. So I know you have some questions in there, throughout the presentation, but do you have any other suggestions about how to make this a little bit more interactive, fun for people who might have sat there with the same presenter for 3 hours? It's
a really good question, and as I'm formulating an answer in my head, the only response that I can come up with right now is just what you said. Because you're doing this in 3 blocks. You guys, whoever's doing it in 3 blocks, whether you're doing 1 or whether you're doing all 3, you've got to figure out a way to make this interactive. So the way that I would do it, and it's just my style of doing things, I would be interactive when I'm with the slides. I would be going and talking to people and asking them. Even if people aren't asking questions, I would prompt questions from people about it. But no, you bring up an excellent point, and Ted is listening. You bring up an excellent point. How do we maintain through this block of 3 hours? If they are, because some, it's my understanding, and Ted, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's my understanding that some institutes will present them all as a block. Some institutes are breaking the blocks up. But again, that's not my area of expertise.
Yeah, and that is true, but unfortunately some institutes, they had to do their schedules.
Right.
The ones that are coming up in the next couple of weeks, they had to post their schedules quite a while ago, so we didn't really know what these presentations were going to look like. So in hindsight, yes, we should have broken them up, and we will do that for the ones that the schedule isn't finalized. So I was just wondering, in terms of technique.
No, that's what it is. What you're describing is technique. Because I can imagine myself being the person that has to do all three of them in a row, and that would be my concern. How am I going to go through this material and make sure that I'm making it interactive? The material itself, and again, for me, it depends on the audience. Because is this an audience that's comprised of predominantly new? A new workforce? Is it a smattering of new and mostly experienced a workforce, or is it all experienced workforce? What is the composition of the room? In the two times that it's been presented outside of Harvey and either Harvey or Brad presenting it, it has the feedback that I've gotten has been that it has resulted, at least this one. I don't know about the other ones. I'll have to default to Ted for that. That this has been a lively discussion, not lively as in good. The way that the term was, this was a really good discussion. We had a really good discussion about this. So that's, I guess, that would be my recommendation. Kind of turn it into a discussion. Use some technique to turn it into a discussion. And what we're doing is we're talking about readiness. As opposed to just simply listening and being presented readiness. Let me make a note of that. That's an excellent point, too.
Okay. Thanks.
Because it's interesting you say that, because when Harvey does it, Harvey has some techniques that he uses to try to make things more interactive with it, and to ensure that the audience is still engaged with him. I did notice that. I was taking some notes when he was doing it.
Yeah, I think maybe inserting some well-placed questions to kind of provoke some responses, maybe have people say, well, what is readiness, before you go to the slide that has the definition. And that really illustrates the point, for example, that, wow, there's, 3 people answered with 3 different answers. So what is the definition we're going to, right? And so it's kind of provocative, and it engages them. And so I could see opportunities for planting some of those kinds of questions throughout, or giving somebody an opportunity to tell a story. So yeah, I think we can bake that into the narrative, so the instructors have that.
I'm taking notes right now. That's a great suggestion too, Ted.
Or a story, if you have a good story to tell too, as the presenter, which is one of the things Harvey does too. If you're a good storyteller, you want to tell a short story and kind of hook them early, that sort of thing. But I think the questions throughout are probably the biggest thing that everybody can use. If we bake them in, it's easy to use too. So.
So any other questions, offers, or concerns? Okay, because I think, Ted, how long did we schedule this for? Have we passed our?
Yeah, we're really a little past. I know we started late because of the low turnout here, but so we're right about on schedule. We wanted to stop at 4:15. It's now 4:20. If there's no other questions, we are recording this, and I am going to post a version to the Disaster Training YouTube site. But again, if there's any final questions, if not, then we'll wrap things up here. One more time, questions? All right, I think we're done. So Gregory, thanks very much for facilitating today, and for being so generous with your responses, and had great questions from everybody, so much appreciated. We're here to support you. So again, we'll get this posted. We'll be updating the slide deck. We'll bake some questions into the narrative and clean up some of the typos. And again, that was at, I think, about 90% the narration was. So there's a little bit more work to do on it, even without the typos. So we'll get all of that tidied up and keep you posted as new materials come out. All right. So thanks to everybody.
Let me add to that. Thank you guys very much. Your questions will influence how we move this forward. But please, thank you very much for your participation, all the great questions. Thank you.
Yeah, great. All right, thank you. Have a great day.
All right, guys, have a great day. Bye-bye.